What if the world's wealthiest dynasty, the very family that financed kings and shaped nations, carried within its veins something darker than fortune? What if behind marble halls, gilded portraits, and sealed vaults there lay a secret, not written in ledgers of gold, but in blood? Welcome, dear friends, to Gothic Ledger. Tonight, we turn the pages of the Rothschild archives not to recount banking victories, but to follow the hushed whispers of disappearance, affliction, and silence that have haunted their name for centuries. From cousins quietly sent away to Vienna, to ledgers filled with cryptic initials, to descendants who still even now refuse to speak openly, this is a history where myth and record blur. And with every missing name in the family tree, the mystery only deepens. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it as you press play? Share it in the comments. I always love knowing how far these forgotten histories travel. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Gothic Ledger and leave a like so we can continue unearthing stories that were never meant to be told. Now, let us step inside the vault and listen closely to what the records refuse to say. The air of the banking hall feels heavy, though no one is present. Marble floors stretch beneath echoing footsteps that do not belong to any living man. Their cadence is like a ghostly metronome. From the walls, whispers seem to seep, fragments of long-forgotten deals. Clerks murmuring over ledgers, patriarchs weighing fortunes, doors shutting upon conversations that never escaped the room. It was within such spaces that the dynasty of Rothschild first took root. Their presence, both magnificent and unsettling, loomed across Europe. By the late 18th century, Meyer Amschel Rothschild had risen from the narrow alleys of Frankfurt's Judengasse to establish a web of sons across the continent. London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. Their names tied together an empire of finance, so tight that even kings leaned upon it. This was not the power of armies, but of invisible authority, credit, influence, trust. Yet alongside the brilliance, shadows gathered. The Rothschilds inspired whispers of endurance that seemed unnatural, of secrets hidden within gilded walls. In 1818, a journalist for the Times observed uneasily, "Their halls are always lit, their agents always in motion. They do not appear to tire as other men tire." Words meant as admiration instead stirred suspicion. What sustained them beyond human discipline? In salons across Europe, the rumors grew louder that within Rothschild, blood ran not only fortune, but something else, something more unsettling. In Vienna, a banker's private letter, still preserved in the archives, carries a cryptic remark. The accounts balance, but the heirs are unsteady. One should never look too closely at the price of continuity. The line is never explained, but like a shadow cast across the marble columns of history, it lingers. So, historians today wrestle with the puzzle. Was it envy that painted the family as unnatural? Or did their obsession with cousin marriages, designed to preserve fortune, feed darker suspicions? Because for all their visibility, the Rothschilds guarded their privacy with unbreakable ferocity. Behind every great portrait of a patriarch, oil paint, layered thick with confidence, there may be another story left untold. Relatives who vanished, heirs who faltered, inheritances that stretched beyond gold into something the family refused to name aloud. Their banking halls endure as monuments of grandeur. Yet, in the faint echo of unseen footsteps, lies the suggestion that wealth was not their only legacy. Somewhere beyond the vaults and ledgers, another kind of record was kept. One no banker could balance and no dynasty would willingly reveal. The empire rose unmatched. But in its silence, there are vaults no investor ever entered. And inside those hidden rooms, the air was not filled with the scent of currency, but with the dust of medical files no one was meant to read. Picture this, a dimly lit dining room, curtains drawn against the night. A heavy silence broken only by the clink of silverware. Around the table sit cousins, uncles, daughters of the Rothschild line. Their voices too measured, too careful, never to escape beyond the walls. At the far end hangs a genealogical tree. Its branches curl back upon themselves, looping inward as though refusing to reach toward the outside world. Because for the Rothschilds of the 19th century, marriage was never a matter of love. It was a matter of ledgers, of networks of empire. Cousin wedded cousin. Uncles arranged matches as carefully as loans to monarchs. A father's letter to his daughter in 1824 reads coldly, "Do not look beyond our house. The strength of our fortune is its unity, and unity is preserved by blood." The branches of that family tree were drawn with careful ink, but they folded inward unnaturally close, like vines sealed in a chamber with no air. Genealogists now warn such strategies preserved wealth but also frailties. Traits carried silently from one generation to the next. As one scholar of aristocratic bloodlines, Dr. Henry Ulrich, writes, "The Rothschilds did not merely inherit money. They inherited themselves. That is the danger of any closed circle." Letters confirm what few dared say aloud. One cousin wrote from Paris, "There is talk of weakness in one branch. We are told not to speak of it, but the eyes reveal what the mouth will not." Another diary entry unsigned resigns with chilling brevity. "The children are pale. Perhaps the blood is too near itself." The language was coded, concealed. Physicians described delicate health, nervous dispositions, or unsteady temperaments. Polished etiquette veiled the tension at family dinners. Every arranged marriage was a preservation of fortune, but also a sealing of fate. The Rothschilds endured. Their ledgers expanded. Their empire stretched across Europe. But in the pursuit of purity, they may have carried forward something else entirely. One genealogist's private note ends without conclusion, only with foreboding. Purity demands a price. The question is not if it will be paid, but when. Now imagine a forgotten office. Shelves sagging with dust-laden volumes. A ledger uncovered after more than a century, its brittle pages browned with age. But what it records is no ordinary clinic register. This one belonged to a discreet Parisian establishment in the mid-19th century, a place that served not the desperate poor but the wealthy who could afford silence. Among the coded patient records, initials and marks. Faint Latin phrases, hurried physicians' notes, appear entries some scholars now link to Rothschild names. One line reads, chillingly, MR, recurring visions, family requests privacy. Another LR, auditory disturbances, to be confined for observation, nocturnal episodes recorded. These fragments in the Parisian ledger are detached from full names. Yet historians cannot help but notice how closely they echo whispers about Rothschild heirs from that very era. Physicians sworn to discretion devised codes to cloak what could not be openly described. Again and again, the letters DS appear. Some believe it stands for dérangement d'esprit, a polite 19th century euphemism for madness. Another mark recurs throughout the pages, a small triangle carefully inked. Its meaning has defied explanation, but modern theorists speculate it signaled hereditary cases illness passed through blood. In the archives of the Académie nationale de médecine in Paris lies an unsigned physician's letter, its words carrying a chilling weight: "We treat those whom the city must not see." Their names never leave our walls, though their conditions echo in the silence of the wards. No proof ties the statement directly to the Rothschilds. And yet, the letter's date aligns exactly with the ledger's darkest entries. Even today, historians tread carefully. Some insist the book proves nothing, merely a routine register of wealthy patients. Others argue it is evidence of concealment, a hidden record of hereditary affliction in Europe's most powerful dynasty. Geneticists dismiss the coded notations as medically inconclusive. But conspiracy theorists counter that the ambiguity is itself the evidence, a deliberate veil. After all, silence can hide as effectively as words. What unsettles even cautious readers are the final pages. Many entries, initials, symbols. Physician notes have been violently struck through with thick ink. The pen gouged the paper, tearing it as though the writer's hand trembled with haste or anger. Entire lines vanish beneath black smears, but when held against the light, faint impressions remain. One erased entry whispers are unfit for continuation. Family present. Request total silence. The words trail off, swallowed by ink. The Parisian ledger does not confess openly. And yet, in its erasures, its silence, it speaks more loudly than any clear account. It is an archive designed not to reveal but to obscure. And in those obliterated lines, history whispers of a truth someone desperately sought to bury. The sound comes first. The wheels of a carriage clattering against wet stone. Hooves striking Vienna's cobblestones, their rhythm muffled by fog, rolling low along the Danube. No coachman calls out. No lantern shines. Only an iron gate creaks open and the carriage disappears into a courtyard few eyes dare to watch. This, so the whispers say, is how a cousin of the Rothschild family was removed from sight. His name never appears in public record. In the family's archives, it surfaces only as initials obscured by smudged ink. A letter from Frankfurt, dated 1837, offers the faintest trace. Written by a Rothschild matriarch, it reads, "He will be better attended to in Vienna. Silence, as always, will protect us." Later correspondence repeats the command. Do not inquire further. To dwell on such matters brings only grief and risk. That cousin's disappearance coincides with the opening of discreet Viennese institutions, elegant asylums designed for the aristocracy. Confined within their gilt wallpaper and hushed servants, noble patients lived hidden lives. Confinement softened, but confinement all the same. Physicians wrote little. Their notes were reduced to euphemisms, nervous weakness episodes, unsteady faculties. Words that veiled rather than explained. Genealogists trace the family tree and stumble upon this silence like a missing step on a staircase. One remarked, "A branch disappears, its leaves never drawn," as though the tree itself were ashamed. In portraits, a chair left empty. In diaries, a name half formed before the pen falters. Conspiracy theorists seize upon the timing. Just as the Rothschilds consolidated financial control across Europe, one cousin was quietly erased. Was it illness, or the danger of appearing weak in a world where strength meant survival? A physician's register in Vienna contains only one haunting note patient received from Frankfurt. Family instructed utmost discretion. Episodes recur at night. Doors to remain locked. Then the page ends. No prognosis, no conclusion. The following leaves have been torn clean from the binding. Among the fragments that survive one diary page remains most chilling. Written in a rushed hand. "They say I am unwell, but I know the truth. I was not asked. I was sent." The sentence cuts off. The page is jagged torn. The carriage that carried him into Vienna never brought him back. His absence became a presence of its own, preserved by wealth, enforced by secrecy, and hidden behind iron gates. The dynasty endured, but he was gone, erased in silence. Step forward with me into the archive itself. The air is stale, unmoved for decades. Iron cabinets line the walls, their locks rusted, but their contents guarded more by secrecy than strength. Inside lie folders bound in red ribbon, not banking ledgers, but medical files. Reports scrawled in hurried hands. Records that whisper of another inheritance running through the Rothschild name. Suppressed files retrieved only in fragments speak of conditions concealed, schizophrenia, melancholia, and what physicians then called unmentionable disorders. The language is cautious. One note reads, "Patient of prominent lineage. Persistent visions. Speech disordered. Condition hereditary. Recommend continued observation." Another decades later, air unsteady in conduct. Blood weakness suspected. Advise privacy above all. It is clear these notes were written not for precision but for discretion. In the margin of one file, a physician scribbled in Latin, "Non decendum palam." It must not be spoken openly. Modern scholars still debate these fragments. Are they conclusive proof or simply the vague conventions of 19th century medicine? The records leave us unsure. But the pattern unsettles recurring symptoms. Recurring silence, recurring instructions to conceal. An anonymized diary, believed to be from a family physician, reveals more. They speak of wealth as armor. Yet I see the truth in their children's eyes. The inheritance is not only gold. The handwriting falters. The ink smudges as though the words themselves weighed too heavily. Another file offers a description equally veiled, a delicate nature of mind, prone to disturbances not of this world. Best not to name the illness, lest it shame the house. Unsigned, anonymous. But its tone matches that of the Parisian ledger years before. Historians argue endlessly, fact or fabrication, cover-up or coincidence. But through the euphemisms, one truth echoes, something was carried forward generation after generation. At the bottom of one folder lies a final page, darker with age. The handwriting sharper, more deliberate. It ends with a chilling verdict. Her condition is beyond remission. The line continues regardless. The report is signed only with a single letter D. the very same initial once scrawled in the Parisian ledger beside a name that had been struck through in violent ink. The files close, but their silence speaks louder than any balance sheet. Within the Rothschild vaults, not every treasure was meant to shine. The sound is faint, almost imperceptible, like the dying breath of a candle humming softly before surrendering to darkness. Then silence presses into the room, heavy, almost physical. And in that silence, the story of Liberty Rothschild begins to linger. Her life was not one of glittering fortune, but of shadows. Shadows cast by the mind itself. Born into a dynasty whose very name had become synonymous with wealth and endurance, Liberty carried a name that promised freedom. Yet her reality was one of confinement. Records from the mid-19th century describe her as spirited in her youth, but later withdrawn. A physician's note preserved in a London archive offers a glimpse into her condition. Patient exhibits disturbances of thought, periods of withdrawal, and auditory hallucinations. Family requests utmost discretion. Clinical words, yes, but beneath them a suggestion of something more: schizophrenia. A condition rarely admitted publicly in those days, and even more unthinkable within Europe's most powerful banking dynasty. The press, hungry for scandal, circled carefully. A clipping from the Illustrated London News never mentioned her name, but hinted at a lady of considerable wealth, observed in fragile condition, her kin anxious to preserve privacy. As you can imagine, in an era when mental illness was feared, even a whisper could stain the carefully polished image of such a family. And within private correspondence, Liberty's name surfaced only in hushed tones. A relative in Paris once wrote, "It troubles me to hear of her visions. They say she hears voices in the corridors, though none are present. The house has grown quieter since her illness." The tone was not of compassion but of unease, as though Liberty herself threatened the unity the Rothschilds so fiercely guarded. Modern historians suggest her case was the first time the family's hereditary shadows slipped into public view. Curiously, genealogists have noted that her branch of the family tree was sketched with unusual vagueness. Dates blurred, details omitted. One descendant, speaking under anonymity, admitted her name was always a warning. We were told not to ask, only to remember she was different. A diary believed to be that of her attending physician contains a haunting line: "Her fortune cannot shield her from the voices. She speaks to them as though they are kin." Despite this silence, Liberty's story did not vanish completely. She became a symbol, the first breach in the Rothschild wall of secrecy. A reminder that not even the strongest vault can hold the weight of inheritance. And yet, her final years remain a mystery. After her third decade, the trail of records grows thin. No obituary in major papers, no official record of her residence. The family archives, meticulous in nearly every other detail, fall silent when her name arises. And it is this silence, more than any diagnosis, that unsettles. For Liberty Rothschild's final years seem to have been erased, as if someone had carefully taken a knife to history itself. The ticking of a clock marks the passage of time in a quiet study. Each second falling like a reminder legacies cannot be escaped. And here, decades later, another Rothschild, Miriam Rothschild, chose a very different path. Unlike many of her relatives, Miriam devoted her life not to banks or ledgers, but to science. to insects, to nature, and most tellingly, to the mysteries of the mind. She was celebrated as a naturalist of great repute. But beneath that brilliance lay a quieter preoccupation. Miriam funded schizophrenia research. At first glance, a curious choice. Some contemporaries were puzzled, others unsettled. But fragments of her journals suggest a deeply personal motivation. There is an inheritance we do not speak of, she wrote, yet I cannot turn away from it. To fund its study is perhaps the only way to lessen its hold. It reads less like a scientific statement and more like a confession. Was she writing to history or to the ghosts of her own family? Historians argue Miriam's philanthropy was more than generosity. It was recognition that what had afflicted liberty and perhaps others unnamed was no isolated tragedy. Dr. Ayla Webster, a historian of medical philanthropy, observed, she did not scatter her wealth broadly. She placed it where she believed it would touch the problem closest to her house. Private letters reveal tension. Miriam once wrote, "They say I speak too freely, that I give too much to causes which draw eyes upon us. But how can silence heal?" Another fragment cuts even deeper. "Every gift I give is weighed against their pride. Yet pride has never eased the burden of a disordered mind." Her words feel almost like an act of atonement. By funding schizophrenia research, Miriam was acknowledging what others denied, that the Rothschild inheritance was not just gold, but shadows woven into blood. Still, the family never openly embraced her mission. In public, she was celebrated as a scientist. At home, she was tolerated, her choices quietly endured, not honored. Her final journal entry, written in a hand unsteady with age, reads, "I do not give for them to see. I give because I cannot forget." Perhaps Miriam's greatest act was not charity but confession, an offering to ghosts that candlelight could never banish. And so, the silence continues. Behind closed doors of discreet London clinics, whispers tell of names erased from ledgers, files locked or burned. A nurse once confessed, "There were names we were not permitted to write in full. We kept them on slips of paper. Then one day, they were taken and the cabinet locked forever. What remains are fragments, gaps, erasures. Enough to suggest a truth, but never enough to prove it." And maybe that's why this story endures. Because silence too is a record. The Rothschilds appear less often in the records than one might expect given their prominence. And sometimes, absence itself feels suspicious. Anonymous fragments only deepen the unease. One former attendant remembered a doctor muttering under his breath, "We are not healers here. We are keepers of silence." Another recalled being instructed never to look the patients in the eye, as if even recognition might break the unspoken contract of secrecy. The deeper one searches, the thicker the silence becomes. It is as though these clinics did not exist to preserve health, but to preserve reputation. Their cabinets were not locked with keys, but with fear. Among the fragments that survive is one half-burned page rescued decades later from an ash bin. The top is gone, dissolved into black dust. Only the bottom remains, warped ink, spelling out a phrase both chilling and resolute. Family line continues. The echo of that line carries through lonely corridors where no visitors come. Footsteps fall against shuttered glass panes, rattling with the wind. In forgotten estates, country houses on the fringes of Austria, secluded villas outside Paris. Members of the Rothschild name once lived and then simply disappeared. Their absence lingers not in record but in rumor. Genealogical charts, otherwise meticulous in tracing marriages and inheritances, contain strange gaps. Where one expects a neat continuation of lineage, a line halts abruptly. A cousin's name might appear without date of death, without issue, and without further trace. In some cases, the names are absent altogether, though letters confirm their existence. One chilling fragment found in a box of family correspondence reads, "He grows restless, unsuitable for society. Arrangements have been made. Do not speak further." No location is given. Only the assurance the matter is contained. Estate inventories from the late 19th century echo the same story. Properties maintained on the outskirts of Vienna or hidden away in the countryside of Bohemia. Yet the registers list only caretakers and staff, no family in residence. Local rumors filled the void. Farmers whispered of lights glowing in the upper windows, though no carriages ever arrived at the gates. Of figures glimpsed behind curtains who never came into town. Dr. Anelm Kruger, a genealogist who studied Rothschild family charts, put it bluntly. In families of such prominence, documentation is everything. Absence here is not accident. It is intention. Children of later generations recall whispered warnings. One descendant admitted, "We were told not to ask about the vanished cousins." It was said they lived abroad, though no letters ever came. Their portraits were taken down before we could remember their faces. Another speaking hesitantly confessed, "I heard one was in a sanatorium, but we were taught to call it travel." Letters from Vienna's clinic staff seem to confirm these whispers. One note reads, "Patient arrived from family of prominence. No visits, expected fees prepaid in perpetuity." Another states with finality, "His rooms to remain shuttered." These were not patients awaiting cure. They were lives shelved away forever. Their absence became the dynasty's shield. To erase was safer than to acknowledge. To lock away was more convenient than to explain. Among the Rothschild archives lies one object more unsettling than the rumors. A family tree carefully inked charting marriages and births across generations. And yet, in the middle of the page, one branch ends abruptly. The line trails off into nothing, unfinished, unexplained. It feels less like a genealogical error and more like a deliberate silence. The scene shifts. The sound now is mechanical. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights in a laboratory. Cooling fans whir softly. Machines click as fragments of blood pass through them. Here in sterile labs, rather than candlelit salons, the legends of the Rothschild dynasty are tested against DNA itself. Modern scientists tread carefully. To invoke the word curse is to risk discredit. Yet, the questions persist. Did generations of cousin marriages leave genetic traces? Do the whispers of psychiatric illness in the archives have biological roots? Or are they nothing more than coincidence magnified into myth by envious outsiders? One geneticist interviewed anonymously gave a measured answer. Without unrestricted access, nothing can be proven. But repetition across generations is rarely random. Even his hesitation betrayed tension, the space between evidence and speculation. Fragments of DNA reports have surfaced at closed conferences. One excerpt reads, Sample shows clustering of markers linked to affective disorders. Statistical weight inconclusive without larger pool. Another family lineage exhibits reduced variation consistent with endogamy. The notes are anonymized, stripped of identifiers. Enough to unsettle, never enough to confirm. Historians armed not with molecules, but with letters and portraits offer a different perspective. They argue that illness in great families is as much perception as reality, each symptom amplified by scrutiny, each weakness magnified by envy. One scholar remarked, "The idea of a curse explains what envy cannot. It is a narrative, not a diagnosis. Yet conspiracy theorists push further. To them, the very absence of accessible DNA samples is proof of concealment. They claim the family has used its wealth to secure privacy, ensuring whatever genetic truth lies in their blood will never face daylight. On fringe forums, diagrams of chromosomes are placed beside 19th century caricatures as though science and satire could be woven into one argument. And within academic circles, the debate remains unresolved. Some dismiss hereditary theories outright. Others quietly admit the silence of archives of locked cabinets of missing files echoes too loudly to ignore. Unanonymized transcript from a private symposium captures the tension. A historian cautions, "Without evidence, we risk repeating superstition." A geneticist counters, "Absence of evidence is not absence of cause." Patterns beg explanation. The dialogue trails off uneasy. As though both sides know, they circle something just out of reach. And perhaps that is where the Rothschild shadows live, not in diagnosis, not in proof, but in silence. In one private interview, a scientist leaned close his name, withheld his words, confessional. The samples exist, but they are sealed. No one outside the family will ever see them. The low hum of the laboratory lingers steady and indifferent, like the machines themselves somehow understand that truth, much like inheritance, can be locked away forever. The sound is metallic, like the heavy clink of vault doors closing iron, striking against iron with deliberate finality. For the Rothschild family, secrecy was not simply a habit, it was an heirloom as essential as gold itself. Their vaults did not hold only coins, bonds, or jewels. They preserved something far more valuable: silence. Silence that was bought, guarded, and passed down from one generation to the next. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Rothschilds mastered not just banking, but the careful shaping of their image. When newspapers whispered of illness scandal or eccentricity, a discreet envelope often found its way into the right hands. By morning, the troubling column would vanish, replaced by harmless chatter about politics or horse races. A Parisian journalist once confided in his private notes, their agents never threatened. They smiled, they listened, and they left an envelope folded twice upon the desk. The story was gone by sunrise. Even archives and institutions bent beneath this influence. Historians who sought answers often found empty shelves where records should have been. A Viennese archivist, long after his retirement, admitted, "We were instructed to treat their papers as sovereign. If a file displeased them, it ceased to exist." His confession remains unproven, but the silences in history often speak louder than the words preserved. Old newspapers still tell on themselves. In one London edition from 1865, a small notice appeared. A gentleman of finance has taken ill under delicate circumstances. By the very next day, that sentence was gone, erased, replaced with the mundane coverage of a local horse race. A subtle edit, yet one that reveals how wealth sculpted public memory in real time. And here, friends, I invite you to pause and consider how many of our own histories, the ones we take for granted, might also have been quietly rewritten. To sympathetic scholars, this careful management of information was not merely paranoia, it was power. Professor Alan Vickers, a historian of European finance, observed, "They controlled not only capital but narrative, and narrative, whether preserved or destroyed, outlasts any balance sheet. But silence has its limits. No matter how heavy the vault or whispers seep outward like water through stone. Rumors of missing heirs of family members, quietly confined of unexplained afflictions, they survived every attempt at suppression. Even in the shadows, truth has a way of leaving traces. Those shadows grow darker still when we step into the realm of bloodlines. Genealogical charts meant to display pride in ancestry begin to resemble something far more unsettling. What should have been family trees instead look like tangled knots branches folding back upon themselves. The Rothschild family, desperate to keep wealth within, often chose blood over strangers. Cousin married cousin. Uncle became father-in-law. Generations bound themselves tighter and tighter until the tree resembled not strength, but a labyrinth with no exits. One chart from Vienna survives its ink browned with age. At first glance, it is ornate and elegant with curling calligraphy and delicate lines connecting relatives. But as you study it longer, the beauty warps into unease. Lines circle back. Names repeat. The symmetry becomes suffocating. Photographs only reinforce this haunting impression. Faded portraits show cousins who look almost identical, their faces blurring into a single expression, repeated over and over. In one family album, 3 children sit together, and even seasoned historians remark how strangely alike they appear, as though they were not individuals at all but reflections of a lineage intent on folding in upon itself. Letters too betray the quiet consequences. In 1849, a Parisian aunt wrote, "The match is for fortune's sake, but the children look pale. The doctor warns of weakness, though none dare speak of it aloud." Another letter from Frankfurt notes a nephew, withdrawn and quiet, his decline recorded in ink, though never in public memory. And so the silence preserved in vaults and archives seeps into flesh and blood, into names and faces, into children who bear the cost of secrets too carefully kept. They say it is simply his nature, one relative once remarked. But I wonder if the tree bends too heavily upon him. It is a chilling reflection, for genealogists who have traced the Rothschild line often speak of a fragile pattern that threads its way through the family. Dr. Emil Hartmann, a scholar of European dynasties, put it starkly. The tree was cultivated like a garden wall, pruned inward, cut too close. And gardens too carefully tended often wither in silence. Within those careful records, illness emerges with unsettling regularity. Mentions of delicate health, nervous dispositions, sudden disappearances. Names that appear in one generation only to vanish in the next, as though erased, not lost. One London archive preserves a particularly haunting chart. The genealogical lines progress neatly, marriages, children, alliances, until they stop abruptly. 3 names are there but struck through with thick black ink. No marriages noted, no issue recorded. Just a violent crossing out, as if ink alone could erase existence. Hold the page to the light, and beneath the smear the handwriting trembles. Line ends here. The quill falls silent, yet the ink remains a grim reminder that what was drawn to symbolize strength instead reveals collapse. And then footsteps echo down a corridor in Vienna. Lamps flicker low, their light swallowed by stone walls. It is here in this city of grandeur and silence that the story of a Rothschild cousin, removed quietly from public life, resurfaces. For decades, his absence was only rumor. Yet letters and diaries drawn from private collections give his silence a voice. One letter dated 1842 begins politely, before shifting into unease. The cousin remains with us, though his disposition is troubling. He walks the corridors, at night speaks to shadows, refuses food. We are asked not to record his name. The deliberate anonymity feels heavy, as though even ink might betray too much. Other fragments appear in the cousin's own hand. A diary, water-stained and brittle, repeats the same phrases. I wake. I pace. I wait for them to come. Later entries unravel. The rooms speak. They tell me I am forgotten. They tell me I am dead, though I still breathe. The words slip from coherence, but the voice is unmistakable. A man collapsing under isolation. Historians confirm the paper, the ink, the handwriting are genuine. Yet context is missing, and silence itself becomes its own evidence. Descendants interviewed in secret recall only warnings. We were told he was sent away for his health, one admitted. But no one ever spoke of his return. His name was a shadow. Another whispered I found his initials once on a chart. They had been crossed out. Among the most unsettling discoveries is an unsigned staff memorandum believed to come from the institution where he was confined. Patient of great name, it reads, exhibits agitation, paranoia, doors to remain secured, no visitors permitted. The words are clinical, but the loneliness implied is absolute. Conspiracy theorists seize on this as proof of deliberate erasure, that his confinement had less to do with illness and more to do with preserving the family's image. Cautious historians suggest stigma and secrecy worked hand in hand, making his exile both convenient and inevitable. Then comes the final diary fragment torn jaggedly across its edge. They say I am unwell, but I know what is true. One among them wished me gone. I was not hidden by strangers, I was hidden by my own. The words end there. The page rips. The corridor in Vienna grows silent once more. But the silence is not empty. It echoes. A plain room. A tape recorder on a table. The ticking wheel gives way to anonymized voices, descendants who refuse to give names. Even blurred, their unease carries weight. We were raised to be proud, one voice says, but also to be silent. If someone in the family fell ill, it was called nerves or fatigue, never the truth. The voice cracks before fading into static. Another years later repeats the same warning. There is an inheritance we don't speak of. Not money, not houses, something else. A fragility. You carry the name, but the name carries you too. Historians reviewing these tapes suggest silence itself became the inheritance passed down alongside estates and titles. Dr. Elise Mahl, a historian of dynasties, explains, The weight of their fortune was matched only by the weight of what could not be said. Psychologists see something darker, still silence as affliction. Dr. Simon Keene observes, when entire branches of a family tree are erased, descendants fill the gaps with fear. Secrecy becomes paranoia. Legacy becomes burden. The testimonies reveal that burden with painful clarity. One descendant admits through a voice filter, "I wanted to study medicine, but my relatives refused. They feared I'd see patterns in the blood." Another grows bitter. "They told us to be grateful for the fortune." But no one speaks of the cost. We are not free of history. We are bound to it. And then, the recording captures the most unsettling pause of all. After a long silence, a voice finally speaks. I will not give names. But yes, there is still someone. Even now they hear voices. The machine clicks. The tape ends, but the silence that follows is heavier than sound. The legacy of the Rothschilds does not end with banks or estates. It continues in whispers that even today, the family cannot fully silence. The sound that follows is final, the thud of a ledger closing. Pages pressed shut after centuries of uneasy entries. Inside lie fragments of lives' marriages. Two close heirs who vanished without a trace, physicians' notes written in veiled language records burned into ash, and family trees that end in silence. The name Rothschild, bold across the histories of Europe, carries alongside its triumphs a shadow that resists erasure. And here historians divide. Some dismiss it all as coincidence and rumor, the distortions that cling to every dynasty of immense wealth. Professor Alan Vickers explains, every dynasty gathers whispers. In the Rothschilds' case, envy turned whispers into myth. To him, the so-called curse is not hereditary, but cultural resentment turned into narrative. Yet others point to patterns too deliberate to ignore. The cousin exiled in Vienna, Liberty's disappearance from the archives, the repeated references to nervous dispositions and weakness in the blood. Each detail on its own may seem small, but together they form a mosaic that even cautious scholars admit is troubling. Dr. Klaus, writing from Vienna, observes, history cannot prove a curse. What it can show is silence repeated across generations. Silence itself is evidence. Conspiracy theorists, of course, take the silence further still. To them, burned letters, missing files, and sealed DNA are not accidents, they are cover-ups. They claim the family's greatest vault was never filled with gold, but with secrets. Secrets locked away with the same precision that safeguarded their banks. Geneticists bound by the language of science tread carefully. Anonymous reports hint at reduced variation markers linked to psychiatric illness. Yet without access, certainty remains impossible. One researcher admits quietly, we see outlines, nothing more. The data remains sealed. What we cannot test, we cannot confirm. The words are clinical, but the frustration beneath them is unmistakable, like staring into an archive that will never open. And so the evidence divides, but never resolves. Letters half erased, diaries torn at the edge, genealogical lines crossed out in thick ink. A cousin pacing forgotten corridors in Vienna. Liberty's name fading into silence. Miriam's journal whispering that she could not forget. Each fragment alone proves little, but together they suggest a burden that no fortune could wash away. And so the question lingers. Was it madness? Was it misfortune? Or was it something darker? Something carried silently through generations, spoken of only in whispers. The ledger has closed, yes, but not sealed. Its silence hums still with unanswered questions. Perhaps that is why the Rothschilds remain, even now, not just a dynasty of wealth, but a riddle written in blood. An inheritance as haunting as it is enduring, echoing through corridors of history where even silence refuses to fade. And maybe here, dear listener, the question is not only about them, perhaps it is about us too, about what every family chooses to remember and what it chooses to hide. So tonight, as we close the pages of this story, let the whispers of the past fade into quiet. The Rothschilds left behind palaces and fortunes, but also questions that may never find answers. And perhaps that is the nature of history itself, always part memory, part silence. If your own family tree holds gaps, secrets, or names unspoken, you may understand a fragment of their burden. Rest now and let the echoes drift away. Tomorrow the questions will still be waiting as they always are. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well.